afternoon, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. It is still Saturday the 14th. It's just afternoon now instead of morning. I went to see Plane, and it's kind of funny, because I was looking at what to watch this weekend, and it was Plane, or the other option was The Devil Conspiracy, which sounded just the right amount of batshit crazy that I would check it out. But I went with Plane instead because, I'm a sucker for a good action movie. And I here's my problem with this movie. And if you heard my review of Megan or M3, you know where I'm going with this. If you've seen this movie and you've heard what I said about that, you know where I'm going with this. This is another movie that is marketed as one genre, and what the genre it's being marketed as feels like a tacked on part. And what I mean by that is, in Megan, the movie is marketed as a horror movie, but at the end of the day, it works just as well as science fiction if you take all the horror out of it. This has a similar kind of issue, where it's kind of like, what was it, Maximum Storm was that movie last year with Naomi Watts, where it's a similar kind of thing, where you have a disaster. Ostensibly a disaster, and it takes a long time to get to them actually getting to the island that crashed on. And let me just lay out the movie before we get too deeply into what my problems are. Basically, you got this guy, he's a pilot, former military, and he's on a plane. You got other passengers on the plane. It's a very light flight, it's New Year's Eve, and the plane is flying from Singapore to Japan. You got some Americans, you got a criminal who's being extradited, he's a murderer, he's being extradited, it's him and his officer. Then you got a few other people, and they're all going to Japan, to Tokyo, for whatever reason. And they go, and, Brody brings to the attention of the guy who's the flight planner. He's like, hey, look, we probably shouldn't do this. If you give us a little more fuel, we can go around this storm and not have to deal with the storm. And the guy's like, look, just go over it, not an issue, and we're not going to do it, just go over it. And Brody's like, whatever, I think it's a bad idea, but we'll follow your instruction anyway. He wants to get back to his daughter for New Year's, and spend New Year's with her, because his wife died recently, and he wants to spend New Year's with his daughter. So he's going to, so that's the flight is. And, he got his co-pilot who he meets and he's getting along with, and they're jiving and all of that, and then plane goes down during the storm. And it takes a long time for the plane to go down, which I'm fine with in the case of this movie, because I think that kind of works for what the movie is kind of trying to be. So the plane goes down, they crash, they safely land the plane, 2 people die, and it's 2 people who decided to get up while the plane was crashing, and both broke their necks or spines and died of massive head trauma. Don't think about them too hard, let's move on. And then the plane, comes to a safe landing. So you have all of this happening all around you. And then they get there, and communications are all fried, because lightning fried everything on the plane during the crash, and they have to communicate to let people know where they are. So the guy who's being extradited and the captain, Brody, decides to go out and try to, find out, find something that they can get information and get information to the outside world. Also, apparently, the Philippines have had a civil war for God knows how long, and this island is where all the separatists live. And rather than just bombing it from the air and calling it a day, which is probably what would happen in reality, the Filipino army is just like, you guys just have fun, enjoy your little island getaway, separatists. This can't possibly come back and bite us in the ass. So they're living here, and what they do is they whenever, and apparently this has happened more than once, because where they have gotten, they've kidnapped people and held them for ransom to get paid. So apparently this has happened at least once before. So they're going to so once they find out that people have been on this island and all of that, the separatists discover also the plane has crashed on the island, and now there is this giant thing where they're going to kidnap the passengers and hold them for ransom, which leads to a giant gunfight, and they escape by flying out on the plane that has been repaired. All of this is kind of interesting. I mean, look, I hate to be the one who's like the Debbie Downer, but I would have done without all the gunplay. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have gunplay in movies. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for what this movie is, about a pilot who wants to get his passengers home, this whole thing with taking the hostages just muddies the entire movie to the point where you're like, this is so unrealistic. Because number one, like I said, if this is the case, and there's a war where there's a civil war where the separatists have this small island, and they all just kind of live there, there's no reason why that hasn't been, like, nuked from orbit, number one. Number two, like, they're so well armed that the Filipino army is not willing to go in there. I don't exactly buy that. And number three, if we're in the situation where the Filipino government has this war going on, and there's this island where tourists keep getting kidnapped to and held for ransom from international governments, after like the second time, maybe it wouldn't still be happening. Because the rest of the world would be like, cut the shit, get your shit together. This is fucking ridiculous. We can't just have our people go somewhere and get kidnapped. What the fuck? And I feel like that's something else that kind of like, this is the issue. Now, you can say this plane crashed and they're headed there, and then cut the last time it happened and all of that. Like, that would be an interesting way to do it. And then you could still use the satellite to be like, look, they're converging on your location. And at one point they show that, where they're converging on your location. If you really want the gunfight, if that's something you really, really want, you can still have it at the plane as they're trying to leave. But it's like, it's so silly, because then it's like you end up with this thing with the guys in an RPG and you can shoot the plane down, and it's like, but I know that there's no real risk here, because they're not going to shoot the plane down this close. That's not what this movie is, after going through everything that it did. Granted, A Man Called Otto yesterday did trick me like that, but I didn't, because I didn't think he was going to die at the end of the movie, but either way, I feel like there's definitely, like, had they removed that part, and it's just a survival story, and it's just this ticking clock, and we have to fix the plane, we have to get attention, we have to get off this island, because there are separatists here, and there is a risk to our personal safety if we stay here. We can't just sit here. That sets a ticking clock, and sets risk that you don't have to get muddied into the geopolitics of the whole thing. And I feel like that's a much better way to use the time and create that sense of urgency to get off. Or even if it is just, I have to get off this island to get back to my daughter, like, that is enough. And I think that part of the problem is, too, they the separatists do kill 2 people, and I'm like, of all of the assholes to kill, why is it these 2? Because here's the issue, is that we don't get to know very many of the passengers. We get to know the murderer, who's played by Mike Coulter. And the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm like, God damn, can we just get another Luke Cage thing? Any Luke Cage thing. Can I just have Luke Cage back, please? I'm going to go watch Luke Cage when I get home, after the wildcard games. And, all of that happens, and you're watching this, and you're like, oh, shit, that would be, like, you get to know him very well. Well, not even his backstory, but more like his, you spend a lot of time with him. And you get to know the co-pilot. But give me a little more on everyone else. Give me a little bit more on Bonnie, the flight attendant, who's not just flight attendant. And then everyone else is just kind of other people. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get into Lost territory, where we're getting to know everyone on that intimate level that we did with Lost, that you get to do over 6 seasons of 22 episodes a season. I'm saying that, like, a little bit of information, so that way, when these 2 characters die, it's not just, oh, that sucks, they're passengers. It's, oh, like, what the fuck? Like, and the thing is, too, it's like, they do a little bit of the shorthand, where it's like, you're watching the movie, and it's like, these 2 guys are gonna die. And it's these 2 guys who are complete assholes from the time they step onto the plane to the end of the movie, and they're not the ones who die. And I'm like, well, why'd you go through such an effort to make these two look like unapologetic assholes through the entire movie up until this point? Where it's like, the plane crashes, and they're all off the plane, and they're immediately bitching at the pilot like it's his fault. And like, oh, you crashed away, I want to get where I'm going. It's like, shut the fuck up. When that happens, that's shorthand for this guy's gonna die, and you're not gonna feel that bad about it. But like, the thing is, too, it's like, because we don't have any development for the two characters that do end up getting killed, like, besides the fact that they're a couple, are they a couple? Or are they siblings? Like, I'm not entirely sure. They don't ever explain what these two's relationship to each other are. So that we just see, like, the girl gets shot twice, and so she's presumably dead. Then the guy gets really, really upset and needs to be restrained by multiple people. And then he gets his throat slit. And you're like, oh, so they're a thing, I guess. Or they're siblings, I guess. Like, no explanation really given. Though some would be nice. I don't know. I feel like there's definitely room there to be like, oh, so here's what's happening, here's who they are in relation to each other, so that way when one dies and one reacts the way they do, we kind of have an understanding as to why that is. And, you know, that would have been something nice to have, I'm just saying. Would have been cool to have, and you get that if we don't spend as much time watching a fight sequence, which I love long take fights, and I've said this before. Give me a long take fight, I will watch it. I love it. Really cool. Let me add a little addendum to that. Give me a long take fight where I can see what the fuck is going on and tell who is who in the fight, and I'll love it. If I can't tell who is who, because the camera is jostling around so much, which is how they're hiding the cuts in this, is through camera movement. If I can't see who's who in the fight, you might as well just cut it to death. And you might as well just, honestly, if I can't tell who's winning in what point in this fight, then you might as well not even show the fight at all. Forget long cut, forget cut it to death, forget anything like that. Just cut the fight entirely, put on the screen a text box that says there's a fight happening, and then cut back to the outcome where the protagonist inevitably kills the other guy. Like, it's a very simple situation there, because I don't need to see the fight then, if you're going to make it so illegible for the viewer. And I think that's part of the problem here, is that we have this, you know, that does kind of permeate how the movie plays out toward the end. And then and that was the thing too, it's like with the shooting, it's like we didn't get to know any of the mercenaries who go to rescue them, which are completely unneeded. We didn't get to know any of them. And then when they do come, like, because we don't know who any of them are besides the one guy who, like, I'm watching this and I'm like, you know what? I'd watch a Mercenaries movie. I said it. I would watch, if EA licensed the rights to Mercenaries, I would watch that movie. But, you know, with all of that, I think there's plenty of room for growth. And it's not a bad movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. There's plenty of good here, and some of the action is interesting. Not all of it. Some of it's very hard to follow, but the underlying story is pretty cool. And I would have, like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I would watch a movie about these people on an island. And, you know, thinking back, I did. I watched a ton of movies because fucking Lost was, however long Lost was, 24 episodes a season times 6 seasons. It's just when I watch this, I'm like, they're like, the action aspects, if they're cut, would create so much more room for additional cool things. And by cool, I mean, like, explanation as to who these characters are, so I have any reason to care about them. What the fuck are you doing? Any of that would be nice, but no, we don't. That's not what they do. They spend a lot of time talking about, you know, not even talking about anything. It's just kind of like, it's a very simplistic movie. We have to get the passengers off the island. That's all we have. That is the beginning and end of the movie, and, you know, it worked. And I think this movie does work more often than it doesn't. But it would be cool if it worked the entire way through. Which, It feels like a platitude, or I'm making up a platitude. But I've heard people say it works more often than it doesn't. But the issue is you can see the outline of what would have made it work the entire way through instead of having the moments where it doesn't work, which is frustrating in a way. But I think we'll wrap up there for today. This week on Exploring Hyperspace Lanes, we will be talking about Andor and about the possible new Star Wars movie that could be coming down the line. We will also be talking about Searching on 30-minute reviews coming this week on Tuesday. We have on Monday morning, we'll be doing the review of the first episode of The Last of Us. And on Sunday, or tomorrow morning, we'll be doing the review of the latest episode of National Treasure, Edge of History. And we'll be continuing on with the coverage we've been doing as it is for The Bad Batch and Velma later this week. So, we'll wrap up there for today. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.